the last of the World War II holdouts, Teruo Nakamura, refused to believe the war had ended and lived in a tiny hut on Indonesia's Morotai Island, until he was discovered in 1974. Many know the story of Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who refused to believe World War II had ended, and didn't surrender until February 1974, while he is frequently referred to as the last World War II holdout. There is another lesser-known soldier who wasn't discovered until 10 months after Onoda. His name was Teruo Nakamura. By the 1970s, World War II had been over for nearly 3 decades. Young soldiers had returned home. But on December 18, 1974, news broke that one man had never gotten the memo of the war's end. Nakamura was discovered on the Indonesian island of Morotai, where he'd been stationed in 1944. After a bloody battle in September of that year, Nakamura had been presumed dead, but he was actually deep in the island's jungle with several other Japanese soldiers, ready to conduct guerrilla warfare as their commander had ordered. This final World War II holdout emerged after 30 years of living in near isolation, to see the whole world had changed. The discovery of Teruo Nakamura sparked significant public discussion of loyalty, ethnicity, and veteran support. Teruo Nakamura was born at Tunpalalan on October 8, 1919 in Taiwan, also called Suno. He was a member of the Amis tribe, a Taiwanese indigenous group. Nakamura was raised in poverty in the island's mountains. This cultural diversity would cause a number of debates later in Nakamura's life. But when he enlisted in the Takasago volunteer unit of the Japanese Imperial Army, in November 1943, there was little interest in his background. Nakamura was stationed on Morotai Island in the Dutch East Indies soon after his enlistment. On September 15, 1944, American and Australian forces attacked the island in a mission that became known as the Battle of Morotai. The Japanese soldiers fought hard, but they were vastly outnumbered and suffered heavy casualties. Many of the remaining men surrendered to Allied troops, but some retreated into the thick jungle interior of the island. According to Time, Nakamura's unit had been commanded to conduct guerrilla warfare in such circumstances. He later told a reporter, "My commanding officer told me to fight it out. So that's what he did." Over the next few months, many of the remaining members of the Japanese army were captured. But Teruo Nakamura remained with a small group of stragglers, determined to continue following commands even though they had no way to communicate with the outside world. With no record of Nakamura's surrender, the Japanese army declared him dead on November 13, 1944. It would be 30 years before his family learned the truth. Teruo Nakamura lived with several other Japanese soldiers on Morotai Island for 12 years. Since they had lost radio contact with their commanders, they had no idea the war had ended. When leaflets were dropped over the island in 1945 declaring that Japan had surrendered and the war was over, Nakamura and his comrades dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Nakamura later told the Taipei Times that he believed the war was still ongoing, due to airplanes that were constantly flying over the island. As the planes became more modern, he assumed there was an arms race occurring between the Allied and Axis powers. In reality, there was an Indonesian Air Force base nearby, and he was seeing daily practice flights. In 1956, Nakamura left his fellow troops and set off on his own, some say because the other men tried to kill him. He built a small hut in a field, and survived by growing sweet potatoes and eating bananas off of trees. He entertained himself by fishing and fiddling with an abacus he made. He cooked only when it was dark so enemies wouldn't see the smoke from his fire. Teruo Nakamura counted the days that passed by observing the moon cycles, and he kept track of months and years by tying knots in a rope. According to the Skeptoid podcast, at some point Teruo Nakamura made a connection with a local man named Bakely, from whom he received basic necessities and creature comforts, like tea and coffee. This arrangement continued for several years until Bakely died. In his will, Bakely asked that his son continue to care for Nakamura. It is rumored that the son may be the one who informed authorities of Nakamura's existence. In November 1974, the Indonesian government was informed that there may be a holdout from the Japanese army living on Morotai Island, and they worked with the Japanese embassy to organize a search mission. It worked. On December 18, 1974, Nakamura, then 55 years old, emerged. He was naked and exhausted but in surprisingly good health. Nakamura was taken to a hospital in Jakarta, where he received a clean bill of health. Indonesian authorities then sent him back to Taiwan to be reunited with his family.